Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along today to this launch event. We're really delighted to welcome you here to launch our newest Think Business, Think Equality resource, which is focused on addressing and preventing sexual harassment. My name is Anna Ritchie-Allen and I'm the Executive Director of Close the Gap. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Close the Gap, we are Scotland's policy advocacy organisation working on women's labour market equality. And for more than 20 years, we've been working with employers, policymakers and unions to enable and influence the types of action that will tackle the causes of the gender pay gap. Think Business, Think Equality is Close the Gap's online self-assessment tool designed specifically for small and medium-sized organisations. And we were really delighted to be awarded funding from Rosa's Time's Up Fund to expand Think Business, Think Equality to include a discrete resource on sexual harassment. It's part of wider work that Close the Gap has been leading in Scotland on sexual harassment, and it forms part of a collaborative piece on sexual harassment that's being delivered by women's organisations in the 4 nations of the UK, also funded by Rosa's Time's Up campaign. In recent years, there's been a greater awareness of the prevalence of sexual harassment, primarily because of the global Me Too campaign, which exposed the extent of sexual harassment and how it affects women's lives. So from unwelcome physical contact, to hearing jokes of a sexual nature, to feeling uncomfortable with a male colleague, the normalisation of sexual harassment is widespread. And in some jobs, we know it's just seen as something that you just have to put up with. In the current context, research has shown that an increasing number of women are sexually harassed while working from home, as perpetrators abuse remote working technology to target women during COVID-19. Sexual harassment is a form of gender-based violence, and it's a cause and consequence of gender inequality. From a workplace perspective, it affects women's ability to do their job, and it can affect their career, making them feel unsafe at work and negatively impacting their mental health. It also contributes to the lack of women in senior roles and Scotland's persistent gender pay gap. Gender inequality means that all women are at risk of sexual harassment at work. And evidence shows that younger women and women in low-paid, insecure work are particularly at risk. However, women across the labour market describe a lack of confidence in their employer to appropriately prevent, investigate and sanction individuals responsible for sexual harassment. The UK government has announced it will introduce a new duty on employers to prevent sexual harassment, which Close the Gap welcomes. But we also know that many employers lack the capacity, the tools and the confidence to address sexual harassment. So these were some of the challenges that we were grappling with when we were thinking about how to design this new Think Business, Think Equality resource on sexual harassment. And we're really delighted to be launching it today. And we hope that it's useful, accessible and effective. But most importantly, we hope that it will enable employers to create sustainable change in their organisations. So we're really pleased to have lots of different people here today to look at the tool and see what's going to be available. So Lindsay Millen, my colleague who's Close the Gap's Policy and Development Manager, is going to be giving an overview of the different aspects of the resource and taking you through a demo of the tool. There will then be some time for questions, which you can submit through the Q&A function. The questions will be automatically anonymised, but if you're happy, you can include your name and your organisation. And then at the end of the event, we're going to send you an email with an evaluation in it. So we're really interested to know how you found the event so that we can always be looking to try to improve how we do these. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Lindsay, who will be sharing her screen to tell you a bit more about the new resource.
Thanks, Anna. Some of you were here at the start will have heard I was at a concert last night and my voice is a bit hoarse because there was a lot of cheering, so I'm sorry if it gives out at some point during this presentation, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Okay, so as Anna said, I'm the Policy and Development Manager at Close the Gap, and part of my role is working directly with employers to support them to take action to advance gender equality in their workplace, and also to tackle sexual harassment and to prevent it where possible. So today I'm just going to take you through a quick introduction to what sexual harassment is, what causes it, and also what employers can do about it. And then I'm going to show you our Think Business, Think Equality tool and the new resources that we have developed on workplace sexual harassment. And as Anna said, I will take you through the self-assessment that we've got. But first of all, I thought it would be quite useful to just quickly set out what employers' legal duties are around sexual harassment. So employers have a legal responsibility to respond to, but also to take action to prevent sexual harassment in their workplace. And the law sets out that employers have to take what is termed as reasonable steps to do that. And if you don't, as an employer, you may be considered liable for that sexual harassment in a tribunal. But the UK government is also going to be introducing shortly a new duty on employers, which requires them to take the same sort of actions to protect employees from and prevent harassment by third parties, such as clients and customers. So basically, our tool will help you to take the steps that you need to take now to make sure you're ready for the new duty when it comes into place, but also to make sure that you're already complying with the existing duties. So, what is sexual harassment? So sexual harassment is defined as unwanted or unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. And the intention of the person, it doesn't really matter. You know, if it makes someone feel uncomfortable or unsafe, then it is classed as sexual harassment. And it can also happen outside of working hours in the workplace. And it also doesn't just happen face-to-face, as Anna was saying, it can happen through email and online platforms. So it's really important to recognise that when it comes to thinking about sexual harassment in the workplace and what that actually looks like. So sexual harassment it's a spectrum of behaviours. It kind of ranges from the subtle to the overt. The more subtle behaviours tend to be things that are quite normalised in the workplace. So sexual comments or jokes of a sexual nature, things that might often be classed as banter, or you shouldn't take that so seriously. And then some of them are more overt, and perhaps more people might recognise these as sexual harassment, such as unwanted physical contact. And when thinking about the different ways that sexual harassment can happen, we worked with some employers while we were developing this tool. Sorry, my buzzer is going. I'm just going to ignore it in case you can hear that in the background. So yeah, we were working with some employers to find out from them what are the barriers that they face to dealing with sexual harassment in their workplace, what are they not so sure of, what would they like to do. And something that came up time and again was employers who expressed concern about not being sure where the line was when it comes to understanding what sexual harassment is. But it's always much clearer than you think. You know, there's clear difference between an employee asking a colleague out on a work night out and, you know, being turned down and just accepting that, and someone who is making repeated unwelcome sexual advances. But regardless, it's not appropriate for an employer to make a snap judgment if they receive a complaint of sexual harassment. If you have to basically take complaints seriously. If someone says they're being sexually harassed and they feel unsafe, you have to take that matter seriously. You have to investigate it and you have to deal with it. The sexual harassment, as Anna was saying, is widespread, and the vast majority of people who are harassed are women, and the vast majority of perpetrators are men. Now, that doesn't mean that men aren't sexually harassed, but where men are sexually harassed, the vast majority of people who do the harassing are other men. And different groups of women also have very specific experiences of sexual harassment. So young women are much more likely to be sexually harassed than older women. LGBT people are more likely than straight people to have unwelcome comments about their sex life. BME women experience racialized sexual harassment because they are characterized as being more sexual than white women. Disabled women are also twice as likely as non-disabled women to experience unwanted touching. So all of this comes down to an imbalance of power and status in the workplace. And the first point here is really key. the vast majority of people who are sexually harassed are women, and the vast majority of people who sexually harass are men. This is a really significant pattern, and it's why we focus on women. It's why these resources focus on women. So that doesn't mean ignoring cases where men are sexually harassed. What it means is recognizing that if the vast majority of people affected by a problem are in a particular group, in this case women, you do need to recognize that that plays a big part in what the root cause of the problem is. And it's important to understand that to be able to tackle sexual harassment in your workplace. And taking that approach will improve things for all of your employees. And that leads us on to why sexual harassment happens. It's not just an issue between two people, it's a part of a wider problem with workplace culture and gender inequality in the workplace. So all of these issues here are still, they play a big part in women's experience of work and women's inequality at work. Gender norms still play a part, say, like telling us what acceptable roles are for women and men in the workplace and in the wider world. Jobs that are typically done by women, for example, social care or childcare, tend to be economically undervalued and low paid. Women still do the vast majority of unpaid care in the home, and there's also a real lack of good quality flexible working. Many employers do offer flexible working, but often there's a very limited range of options, and it's often only found in the lower paid roles, which means that women can't combine that unpaid care with work. And also, as I mentioned before, we still see issues with workplace culture, and it's this that creates an environment where sexualized comments are dismissed as just banter, and in which women are told, you know, they didn't mean it that way, and in which women are not believed. And it's also why male harassers are very rarely held accountable. So obviously this is a mirror of gender inequality in wider society, but that doesn't mean that, you know, employers should just take it as a given that it is going to happen in their workplace and they can't do anything about it. What you do matters, and you can make a huge difference in your workplace if you do take action and work to try and prevent sexual harassment from happening. So why does it keep happening? It's 2022, and unfortunately gender equality hasn't happened, and we do still have sexual harassment in the workplace. And there's a number of things that we hear from women who experience sexual harassment that kind of go along with basically kind of helping to sustain it within the workplace. Often women are told it's just a joke, you shouldn't take it so seriously. And what this means is women's experiences are minimized and normalized, and that creates a big barrier to women reporting, and it also makes women feel undermined in the workplace. Is it sexual harassment? One thing we also hear from women is that they might not recognize that what's happening is sexual harassment. They'll know that what's happening makes them feel unsafe and they're not happy with it, and but they might not recognize it as sexual harassment in the sense that it's something that they should expect their employer to act on if they do report it. And again, that comes back to the kind of normalization of the lower level behaviors that we would say are sexual harassment in the workplace. If it's just normalized people telling particular types of jokes, then you might think, well, it's not taken seriously, so why should I say anything? Another thing we hear is no one else is saying anything. Very often sexual harassment will take place when there's only the person being harassed and the harasser present, but sometimes it happens and other people in the workplace will hear it or see it and they don't actually say anything about it. And what that does is it kind of gives a bit of a tacit consent by colleagues to these behaviours in that workplace. And if you think other people aren't saying anything, maybe you might doubt yourself and you might not feel that you should speak up if it does happen to you. And the last two, these are things that we heard a lot from employers when we were working with them to find out what support they needed to tackle sexual harassment was, oh, it would never happen in my business and I've never received a report of sexual harassment. Now, of course, employers would like to think it would never happen in their business, but just because you haven't received a report doesn't mean it hasn't happened. And it certainly doesn't mean that it won't happen. You can never be certain that it wouldn't happen in your business. The best thing that you can do is take the action that you can to help prevent it. So what employers need to do, as I mentioned at the start, the law requires employers to take reasonable steps to prevent and address sexual harassment. Now, what's considered reasonable is different for different employers depending on the size of your business or the type of work that you do, and any associated risk factors with that. But it does include steps like all of these things: having a suitable policy, having a clear process, having a robust investigation process, and taking that wider action to improve workplace culture. So our resource is designed to help employers do all of these things. So that takes us on to our Think Business, Think Equality tool. So as Anna mentioned, this is a free self-assessment tool for SMEs and third sector organisations who want to take action to advance gender equality in their workplace. And there's a range of resources already on there. Now, although it's aimed at SMEs and third sector organisations, most of the content is equally applicable in larger private and public sector employers. The main difference is for smaller employers, we tend to find they have fewer or no structures in place to kind of help them deal with issues like sexual harassment. It might be the first time they're thinking about it, they might not have an HR function. So Think Business, Think Equality tries to help find solutions for those situations as well. So the tool is broken down into two distinct functions. One is a self-assessment test, and the other is guidance that relates to all of the themes of the tests. So as you can see, there's a range of topics, and all of them interact and work together to help employers to take action. And the different topics basically mean that you could do one test, you could do them all, you can focus in on the areas that are a priority for you at the moment, but it basically means you can take an approach that is appropriate for your business. So the new resources. We've actually got 5 new resources on sexual harassment, but one of them is just a glossary, so there's not a lot of information on that because I'm sure everyone knows what a glossary is. But the 4 resources are basically designed to work together. And the reason for that is it's not enough to take action in one area. You can't just have a policy that's not going to tackle sexual harassment. People need to know you have a policy, for starters. Your employees need to know that it exists. Managers and key people need to know how to implement it. And it has to be followed in the event that a sexual harassment complaint is brought forward. So sometimes, employers can develop a policy and it could just effectively sit as a document on a shelf, not doing very much. And it's important that, you put effort into developing a policy, you want it to work. And our resources basically are all designed to work together and to set out the types of actions you're required to take around policy, around reporting, and around workplace culture to basically be able to provide evidence that you have taken reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in your workplace. So I'll run through in a quick summary of the 4 different resources that we have. So the first one is basically more of an informational resource, everything that you need to know about sexual harassment in the workplace. And that's intended to help employers to build a foundation of knowledge, which will mean that they're more likely to know what the right action is for them to take, and the action is much more likely to be effective because it's underpinned by that understanding. And this resource is referred to in the other resources, and it's a really handy guide to have in the workplace to help especially those people who might be dealing with reports of sexual harassment understand it. So it includes some more detailed information on what sexual harassment is, why it happens, the barriers that women face that mean they don't report it, and what employers can do to prevent it in the workplace. The second resource is how to develop a policy on sexual harassment in your workplace. So that basically includes all the information you need to know on why you need a policy, and also what your policy should include, if it is to be a good practice policy and if it's to be effective. So it includes information on who your policy should cover and where it should apply, the responsibilities of key people who might be involved in receiving disclosures or reports of sexual harassment. It should refer to your procedure for dealing with those, and also the policy document has got some information in there on third-party harassment as well. The third resource is how to deal with reports of sexual harassment. So this is twofold. It has some guidance in there around dealing with reports, but it also contains some model processes. So the guidance talks about how you should deal with reports, whether it's taking a formal or an informal approach. There is a model process for handling those reports and also a model process for carrying out investigations. And it also contains some supplementary information on what you need to do to support an employee through that process and things to think about in terms of managing perpetrators of sexual harassment, especially while an investigation might be ongoing. And then the fourth main resource is how to create a workplace culture that helps to prevent sexual harassment from happening in the first place. So again, this is a twofold resource. It's informational, but it's also action focused. So basically it talks about what a sexist workplace culture looks like. And that's really important because if you don't understand what to look for in a workplace culture to identify any issues you might have to address, then you're not going to get on very well. It's also got some information in there talking about accepting the challenge. And this comes from talking to the employers that we worked with during the development stage of the resources. I think there's that sense that employers don't like to think that it would happen in the workplace. Of course, no one would like to think that, but that can make it more difficult to take action. It can make you feel maybe slightly complacent because you just think, you've got a great workplace and you would never tolerate it, it would never happen. But if reports aren't coming forward, it might be happening and you don't know. So it's really important for employers to be able to take a step back and to take an objective view of their workplace culture if you're going to identify any issues that you might need to tackle. There's also information in there on setting the tone from the top. How leaders behave is really important, and that is really what sets a workplace culture. So there's information on that and how to show leadership on sexual harassment and make it really visible in your organisation that it won't be tolerated if it does happen and employees can feel safe to come forward. And there's also some supplementary in there on taking action to improve gender equality in the workplace, because that will help to prevent sexual harassment from happening, because gender inequality is at the root of that power imbalance that enables sexual harassment to happen. So the other part of the resource is the self-assessment test. And basically what this involves is employers will answer a series of questions about their current employment practice, and then the tool takes those and generates some personalised feedback and guidance around the answers, and also a set of tailored actions that employers can take away and take action in their workplace. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can switch screens, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through the sexual harassment test online. So let me just bring this up. Okay. I will share my screen again. Okay. So this is the Think Business, Think Equality website. Everything, you can navigate to everything you need from the front page, but basically we'll use the toolbar because that's the easiest way to do it. So take the test. This is where you find all of the self-assessment tests, and you can see here there's a list of the topics that already exist. Each test takes around 5 minutes to complete. Sometimes they might take a bit longer if you're not sure about the answer to something and you want to try and figure that out before you answer. But at the end of each test, you get tailored feedback for each one. You can also download the guidance on each topic, which you can find up here, but that's also linked to from the test page. And you can save your results by creating a user account as well, but you don't have to create a user account to use the tool. So let's select sexual harassment. Oh, someone must have done this earlier. Take the test again. Right, okay. So I think there's 10 questions in this one. So do you have a standalone policy on sexual harassment? I'm going to say that I do, because I'm an excellent employer. And so this question basically just asks, if you do have a policy, what different things might be in it. Now, you might be able to answer yes or no, you might not be sure. So I'm going to just select a few of these. And I'm going to say, I don't know about these ones. I'm just imagining I'm an employer. So how would an employee make a report of sexual harassment if it happens? So I'm going to say staff should use the formal grievance process, because it's very common that that's what employers use. However, our resources do recommend that you have a specific process for dealing with sexual harassment, because grievance processes are not effective for dealing with the specifics of a sexual harassment case. And I'm also going to select that staff can report it to a manager. So who is responsible for dealing with the report? I am going to say I'm a very small business, so the director or another manager, because there's often more than one person. Does this person receive training or other support? I'm going to say no, because it's very uncommon that managers receive specific training on dealing with workplace sexual harassment, but it's a very good idea to do that. In common with most employers, I'm going to say I don't know if sexual harassment has been reported in my business. And so are employees ever involved in the following situation? I'm going to select a work night out, and we also have customer facing roles. Has a senior leader ever issued an all staff message or made a statement on how your business deals with workplace sexual harassment? I'm going to say yes. Have you ever sought the views of your employees on potential experiences of workplace sexual harassment? I'm going to say no. And I am going to go for male-dominated managers, because that is most common. The majority of employers, their managers and senior leaders are male-dominated. So you get a rating from your test. So this is suggesting to me that I could do better. So it's made some recommendations for me based on the answers to the questions. So if you click at the end to download these will all just come out like this for you to take away and implement. But as you can see, there's a range of different actions, and they all relate to specific resources where you can find more information on those. For example, speaking to relevant staff to find how confident they are with dealing with reports. As I said, there might be managers in your business that have dealt with sexual harassment reports before, but they might not have been confident doing it at the time. They might never have done it. So having a training on that is really important. And then this relates to the different environments that employees might have to work in, because there's different workplaces have different risks. If there's lone working involved, where there might be a female and a male employee working together just alone, that does present particular risks. Site visits to client sites present a risk, particularly if your employee is going to be alone with one of your clients. And also front-facing services, for example, bars and restaurants, or one-to-one provision of care in the home. There are very particular risks in there that affect your employees as well. So you get your actions up front, and then further down you have lists the answers that you've given to each question, and it also gives you a little bit of feedback and guidance in relation to those. So all of these just basically relate to the actions that have been generated for you, and that will all be downloadable at the end. So you can either create an account, so you can come back and you can see all of your different test results in the same place if you want to take other tests, or you can enter your email and it will be sent to you as a PDF. So I will stop sharing my screen now. So yeah, that's my presentation. So I will hand back over to Anna for the question and answer session.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. I hope you all found that a useful kind of whistle-stop tour through the tool itself, as well as all the overview of the resources and some of the background on sexual harassment. If you do have any comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat, not in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A. And we've got a couple of questions in there already, which I'll go to. So the first one is, someone has asked, don't have a sexual harassment policy specifically, but we do mention sexual harassment in a bullying and harassment policy, and is a separate policy really necessary? Do you want to take that, Lindsay?
Yes, I referred to this briefly in my presentation. There are obviously similarities in how an employer would deal with a sexual harassment case and a grievance case, because it's effectively a disciplinary matter, and you will have processes in place for dealing with disciplinary issues. But because of the very specific circumstances of a sexual harassment case, of how sexual harassment happens, it's very different from bullying or other forms of harassment, for example, harassment based on sex or on race. There are very particular things that you have to consider. You have to be aware of the gender inequality is that it's at the heart of it. You have to be aware of the safeguarding factors in terms of that employee who's reported harassment and what that means for them in the workplace, and the things that might need to happen to support them through the process. And I think also having it as a separate process or policy, even if that is located within your wider policy, but having something that's specifically focused on sexual harassment, will be a better quality process, but it also sends a really strong signal to your employees of how seriously you take the matter. And that will help to prevent it from happening. It helps to affect the workplace culture because employees can see it. And it also makes it much easier for employees to report it if it does happen, because they know that sexual harassment policy and process exists. They can refer to it and they know who to go to if something does happen. So that's why we recommend that there is something standalone and specific on sexual harassment.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. There's another question here, which is actually something we get asked all the time. You know, what the common pitfalls are. What are the most common mistakes, or what can we avoid getting wrong? I suppose that is, yeah, someone's asked about that in the chat. Could you maybe chat through some examples of what we often see?
Yes, I think one of the most common errors employers make, and that these kind of come from my experience of working with employers and also the work that we did around developing this tool. I think that the most basic error is being unprepared, you know, not having that understanding, not having a policy or a process that you can go to, and managers not feeling confident, not understanding how they should deal with sexual harassment. You know, that is often the case where employers will wait until sexual harassment happens in their workplace before they actually do anything. And the legal duties do require that you take action to prevent it as well as address it. So that implies, you know, you've got to be doing something even if you don't have any reports ongoing. So yeah, I think these resources would obviously help address that. Something else that comes up often is employers tend to start from a position of questioning the credibility of the complaint. We sometimes see policies that make a reference to people who make vexatious complaints might be subject to discipline if the complaint is found to be not true. Now, that's a really problematic approach. The leading legal experts on sexual harassment say that you should not mention things like that in your policy. You should always start from the position of treating the report as credible. Evidence shows that sexual harassment is overwhelmingly underreported, not overreported. So it's highly unlikely that it's vanishingly small the chance that someone is actually bringing forward a complaint that's not based in something that has really happened. And I think another thing is not taking the more subtle behaviours seriously, things that are minimised and dismissed as just a joke. Very often, you know, these things, people, because they're so normalised, people don't actually acknowledge the impact that they can have. But also, the more subtle behaviours are often an indication of something more dangerous happening down the line if the more subtle behaviours are not addressed. And very often, if you actually step in and talk to, if someone says, you know, an employee has said something to them that's made them feel unsafe, very often all it will take is a conversation with that person saying, you know, that it's been said that you have said this thing, and that's not acceptable if that has happened. And that's all that needs to happen. Just acknowledging it and dealing with it can nip it in the bud, and it just means that it doesn't go any further. And it's obviously much better for the employee, and it's much better for the workplace if that happens. So yeah, those are kind of some of the more specific things and some of the more general things that I think we see as not only errors but concerns that I think employers have in areas where they could do with more support. So our resources kind of consider all of these things.
Thanks. I think that's really helpful as well, because something we hear a lot is around concerns about making sure that things aren't done wrong, and so I think there can be a bit of apprehension about doing the wrong thing. So that's good to know where some examples of those. There's another question come in here, which is, what do I do if I hear that one of my team is being sexually harassed by a client?
Yes, this is, and this relates, I mean, there is a new duty coming in place on requiring employers to basically, employers will have the same duty to protect their employees from sexual harassment by third parties as they currently do to protect their employees from sexual harassment by their colleagues. And as I said, there are particular environments which present higher risks for sexual harassment to happen. And also, yeah, things like bars, you know, restaurants, where it's quite common for clients to say not very nice things to the person who's serving them behind the bar or their waiter. And that's very common in those kind of lower paid service occupations where there's a really big power imbalance, you know, between the client and the customer, and also within the organisation. Those employees might be quite low level, and so they might not be taken as seriously. But even in those situations, or in perhaps smaller businesses where they're dealing with different types of clients, I think something that employers struggle with is, you know, they don't want to upset the client. They might be worried about losing their business, but it's actually far more harmful not to do anything about it than it is to do something about it. I mean, do you really want a client who is treating your staff like that and actually creating a huge legal risk for you as an employer? So what employers should be doing is having a policy and a process in place that acknowledges the specific risks for their employees, depending on the type of workplace, the type of business that it is. For example, if it's a bar, or if it involves site visits with clients, or meetings with clients. And if you have those things in your process, then you should know if it happens, employees will know that they can report it, and you will know what to do if it does happen. And again, sometimes it's as simple as just flagging it up and having a question. I think that increasingly we're seeing bars and restaurants do have policies on how staff should be treated, and that might include sexual harassment. And there's maybe a little bit more awareness that should be challenged. That doesn't suggest it always is, but you know, employers need to be prepared to step up and step in to protect their employees, and to speak to customers and clients and make it clear that it's not acceptable. And also having kind of visible notices around workplaces like bars and restaurants on sexual harassment can be quite helpful, just to make it clear that there is a zero tolerance policy.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. There's another question here, which I'm sure you won't mind me saying your name. It's Paul McLennan, MSP, who's got a particular interest in this subject matter, which is, how can we ensure that men in workplaces, be that in management or not, own this and recognise its importance in achieving equality and preventing harassment?
That is the eternal question. I think most men in the workplace would be horrified to think that sexual harassment in their work happens in their workplace, the same as most employers would be horrified to think that it happens. But I think one thing that is really important to help men understand their role in tackling sexual harassment as colleagues or as managers is just raising awareness of what sexual harassment is. Because if people are aware of what it looks like, then they're much more likely to notice it and to realise that they have an obligation to will respond to it if they are the employer, or maybe they might feel if they are in a situation with a colleague, a male colleague who's making comments about a female colleague, that they feel more confident to challenge it, because it's that tacit consent thing that means that sexual harassment just keeps happening. And we're particularly in groups of men where the men in that group don't say anything, where a sexualized comment or a sexist comment is made, that sends a really strong signal to the person who's made that comment that actually it's okay that they said that, and maybe those people in that group agree with them, which is really, really problematic. And it's really important for men to understand sexual harassment, to understand how important it is for them to challenge sexism, sexist language and sexual harassment where they see other people doing it. And also, if they are in management, which, you know, managerial roles are very male dominated, to take a real take a leadership position on that and make that visible in the workplace, make an all staff statement that sexual harassment isn't tolerated, that they have a policy, they have a reporting process, and that staff will be supported if they report it. So there's a range of different things, but raising awareness is the first step to that.
Thanks, Lindsay. I did wonder, not to put you too much on the spot, Paul, but I wondered if you wanted to come in. I know that you're keen to raise the profile of this issue in Parliament.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you, yep.
No, listen, Anna, thanks for that, and delighted to be here. And I think what's really important for me is obviously that it's often seen, and I'll admit, even within the Parliament, it's often seen as this is a women's problem, and just let the women deal with it. This is all about men and what men can do. So I think there's a role certainly in the Parliament to be raising that issue, and we've done that a few times, and we've had some discussions. We're hoping to have I suppose, try and bring in some big employers to talk about the policy that's come out and get their view and try and get them signed up, because I think that's really important, and we're looking at that in the new Parliament after the recess. And it shouldn't just be around about the 16 days of activism, which we talk about violence against women. It has to be all year round. So that has to be in the Parliament, it has to be in society, and I think men have to speak up, as you said, in terms of what needs to happen for the policies taken on. It's not just a women's problem, but it needs to be management, it needs to be all men that need to speak up. And one of the key things I think you talked about, Lindsay, was almost bystander training. If that does happen, if they do see harassment, how do they deal with that, you know, and how do they speak up? So that needs to be clear, I think, for all male employees. If they do see it, don't let it happen, you know, and be aware of the process and make sure you speak up, because the more men that speak up, you know, hopefully, you know, the less we'll see sexual harassment. So really keen to work with yourselves in this, and anybody else obviously in this area. So, but it's great to see the report coming out. I think it's a fantastic tool for employers.
That's great. Thanks very much, and thanks very much for your support as well. I mean, I suppose in terms of thinking about bystander approaches, the recent campaign that Police Scotland launched called That Guy, I think, is worth checking out. I think that's been a really good campaign, actually, in terms of encouraging men to challenge the types of behaviours and the things that make it create a conducive context for sexual harassment and other types of gender-based violence. So we've got one more question here, which is around something we get asked all the time as well, is who's doing this well? So which employers are doing this well? And I suppose I would highlight some of the work that some of those employers that engage with Close the Gap's Equally Safe at Work employer accreditation programme, which was piloted with local government organisations and is now also being expanded to third sector organisations and NHS boards. And Equally Safe at Work encourages employers and supports employers to develop practice that will advance gender equality, but also prevent violence against women. And so it's focused on the familiar causes of the pay gap, such as flexible working, workplace culture, pay, occupational segregation, but it's also focused on building capacity employers so that they better support victim survivors of sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence. But it's also about recognising that in order to prevent sexual harassment and violence against women more generally, we need to take steps to address women's labour market inequality. So we have 4 bronze accredited councils just now: Shetland Islands, North Lanarkshire, Midlothian and Aberdeen City, and it's currently being, there's a further 9 councils working towards accreditation just now, and as I mentioned, we're piloting with 5 third sector organisations and NHS boards too. But we've recently introduced a new specific component on sexual harassment. So the other aspect of this project that we've been funded to do, in addition to the work that Lindsay's been leading on, is developing a learning and development resource for line managers around sexual harassment, because we know that building capacity so that line managers have the capability and the confidence to respond sensitively and effectively to disclosures is so important in creating that organisational wide change. So we definitely have seen success with those organisations, that the employers that are engaged with Equally Safe at Work. So we're really looking forward to see how it tests out in different sectors as well. Any more? We haven't got any more questions in the chat, so I suppose this is just if anyone does have any final questions that they would like to add in, please do so now. I see, Paul, you've put in the chat that you met with Graham Goulden from Don't Be That Guy on this work. I don't know if did you want to say anything else on that?
One within the Parliament, and I think, you know, the roundtable we were talking about, maybe with employers that we've been discussing, I think he's quite keen to get involved in that as well, and he has got that real focus on the bystander training. And the advert, I think, that came out, Don't Be That Guy, I think moved a lot of people, and there have been similar other adverts from in other parts of the UK which really hit home, but there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard. But the bystander training and getting men to speak up, I think, is really important. One thing I think is men, I said, owning it, but it's taking the next step and actually being proactive about reporting it and making sure that it's front and foremost in their own organisations. And it still happens far too much. So, you know, it should just be as normal for men to speak up and be conscious that they need to speak up. So, but Graham's done a great amount of work on that, and yeah, I'm sure we'd work with you guys as well to try and push that forward.
Excellent, thanks very much. That's really useful to know, and yeah, good to know that I think we've got NSPs who are out there doing this work too. So, Lindsay, was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we come to the end here? Any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'd really like to thank everyone for coming and for being interested in this work. It's taken quite some time, because it's a real complicated issue, and so we're really pleased with the resources that we've managed to produce. We understand that, you know, employers will still perhaps need a little bit of support to take action in some of these things, but some employers might find it easier than others. But we're always open to talking to employers where they might want individualized support or have questions to ask. And, you know, where they might want some training. So I would just encourage anyone who is interested in hearing more to get in touch, and please help raise awareness of the tool and let your kind of people in your wider networks know that Close the Gap are available as a support for employers.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. And I suppose just to wrap up, I just really want to thank you for coming along today. This is such an important issue, and we're really glad to be developing some specific work on sexual harassment. And I hope you find it useful, and that you're able to take it away to your own organisations and talk to colleagues and think about the action that you can take. As I mentioned at the start, we're going to be shortly emailing you with a link to a very short evaluation survey. If you're able to complete that, that would be hugely appreciated. But for now, I hope you have the great rest of your day. Thanks very much for coming. Bye-bye.